So in this segment, we're going to be breaking down a speech Lord Frost gave to some sort of group about the Northern Ireland Protocol, essentially the origins, the issues around it, and also the future of it. So there's a lot to talk about here. I'm going to break this up into essentially 3 videos and then put it together, just in case anyone wants to watch the longer one. I'm probably going to have some sort of breakdown doing this because this is long as hell. But let's go for the first part, which is the origins of the protocol, which we'll talk about in a moment. There's a bit of preamble here because Lord Frost loves the sound of his own voice. Jesus Christ, man. This guy. This will be long, so buckle up. For the first time, Lord Frost will give a personal account of the politics and pressures of the negotiations in 2019 and kind of the issues around the situation. So he says, ladies and gentlemen, the Northern Ireland Protocol is back in discussion because Sinn Féin will probably win the seat of, be the single largest party in Stormont. The government's plans to bring forward legislation covering the protocol in new parliamentary session. That's talking about the bits where they're going to take out parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. I'm going to cover that soon, so subscribe for that. Says, I was the government's Brexit negotiator in 2019 when the protocol was agreed, again in 2020 when it and the UK Internal Market Bill, do you guys remember that, breaking law in a limited and specific way, were part of the backdrop to our trade negotiations, and in 21 I was the responsible minister as the protocol settlement much earlier than expected and in ways we did not predict started to come apart. And the simple fact is it's been debunked by this gentleman here, Dr. Andrew McCormick, who's debunked the British government. So if you haven't watched that video, watch that one. But yeah, there's a lot of preamble here. He goes, first I note the much recent debate about Brexit is really about the pros and cons of the protocol. In a way that is a good thing. It reflects the relative lack of other things to talk about. So essentially saying things are looking okay-ish. Occasionally another issue like fishing or touring performers gets a look in, which Lord Frost failed touring performers. But generally they kind of fizzle out, which is true. Unfortunately, the resulting attention on the protocol is often rather simplistic and plays little regard to the unusual circumstances of its creation. This is a man who's always come out with simplistic and stupid arguments, accusing others of coming up with simplistic arguments. It's funny, isn't it? Second, and with that in mind, it seems that the protocol has become a symbol of different things to different people, which is true. For some in unionism, it's a symbol of betrayal by Her Majesty's government, again, which is true. Nationalists see it, whether they admit it or not, as a step to a border poll and a united Ireland, which is true. Some do see it as that. For Remainers and many in the EU, is a symbol of the UK's supposed failure to understand what was possible and what it had signed up for, which is true that many Remainers and people in the EU for many Remainers and many in the EU, it is a symbol of the UK's supposed failure to understand what's possible. We could have stayed in the single market and customs union and the Northern Ireland Protocol would have not been needed, but again we didn't. Equally, for some Brexiteers, it symbolises the EU's own carelessness in insisting that on arrangements that prioritise their single market over sustaining the fragile politics in Northern Ireland, which again isn't true. The EU is there to protect a single market, yes, but they have made exceptions for Northern Ireland. It's not a straight block out, essentially, which they could do. They're entitled to do that, but they have made an exception. For other Brexiteers, there is a frustration that we pushed through Parliament a deal which was less than perfect as regards sovereignty and did not absolutely deliver everything that was wanted, because you couldn't deliver everything that was wanted because you promised unicorns and you barely bought a donkey. That's what happened. So overall, what you can tell from this is he's going to argue it's imperfect, but it's the best we could do given the hand we were dealt, and to an extent he's probably right given the goals that they had. He says there is some truth in all these judgments, but more in some others. As a result, discourse about the protocol has become disconnected from reality. That's you, pal. You're the only one disconnected from reality here. He goes, I want to do 3 things. First, recall what actually happened in 2019, how we got the protocol. Second, explain how it started to go wrong. And third, and finally, comment on what needs to happen now. So this is where we'll start the main bit of the video, really. How long have I talked for already? 4 minutes, not bad. So this is the origins of the protocol. This is the beginnings of it. And we're going to break it up into 3 videos and just put them back together. So first then, how did we get this protocol? The negotiations we conducted in autumn 2019 have already disappeared from political memory because, the Tories back then, before the election, had a very, very weak hand. There were a minority government, the DUP were there in coalition. the DUP would never have backed this. And they were made a mockery of, really, the Tories at that point, purely because they couldn't get anything through Parliament. They were desperate and they couldn't do anything, so they went for the only thing they could do, which is lie in a general election. You go step back to the moment that Johnson entered office in 2019 of July. We were faced with a withdrawal agreement that we could not get through Parliament. That was the one where it would keep the entirety of the UK and the EU single market and customs union for goods. And what would happen is that until there was some sort of magical unicorn solution to the border in Ireland, only then could the UK leave. There were lots wrong with it, notably the continued role for the EU's Court of Justice, which still applies to Northern Ireland. But the worst aspect was that the first version of the Northern Ireland Protocol via the so-called backstop, its effect was to keep all of the UK in the EU customs union and single market until a different way of managing the Northern Ireland border had been found. That's why he's turned the backstop effectively into a front stop. That's what he's done. Even though the EU had said there was no other way, there would be alignment of the whole of the UK to the single market for goods and much else besides, so it'd be dynamic alignment essentially. And yet, despite all this, the concept of an Irish sea border remained in the agreement, but it was as a backstop. It wasn't really, I don't think the Irish sea border was the plan. It was to kind of stop, they were meant to solve the border issue, a hard border issue. There wasn't much about a border in the Irish Sea as far as I'm aware. Because Northern Ireland was removed from the UK's customs territory for WTO purposes, and Great Britain and the EU plus Northern Ireland were put back together into a customs union. It was the worst of all worlds. I don't know if he's telling the truth here. I genuinely don't. I'd have to go back and read all of that stuff and have more nightmares. Beyond that, we faced an agreed political declaration which committed the country to a high alignment soft Brexit in the future relationship negotiations that would follow. But to be fair, we still did agree to the political declaration about standards. Even under Boris Johnson, I think we still agreed to that, to have high standards. And the trade and cooperation agreement doesn't allow us to backslide on certain regulations and workers' rights. So again, he's not telling the truth here 100% in my opinion. In considering how to proceed, we face serious dilemmas and many factors that we need to balance. They explain why the final deal was imperfect, and it was always going to be because these people lied to us. First, we had to deal with the growing belief among the political class and the public that the referendum result simply couldn't be delivered because you promised unicorns. You said only a madman would leave the single market. No one is threatening our place in the EU single market. No one's talking about the end of freedom of movement. You guys all told different stories. £350 million to the NHS. You guys all told different stories, that's why. So when the rubber hit the road, there was no way you could deliver because you promised lots of different things. Third, it was clear that a substantial proportion of the political class in all parties wanted to find a way of reversing the referendum result. It's not strictly true. Theresa May was very much desperate to push through Brexit, and I think Jeremy Corbyn was as well. I think he wanted Brexit to happen. Few British governments entering into office had faced such quite a daunting prospect. Probably true. We had to cut through this somehow to get an agreement that we could get through Parliament. So we had to set priorities for the 3 months we had to be ruthless in doing so. And to be fair, we had longer than 3 months, didn't we? We could have asked for an extension. These were self-imposed deadlines. Theresa May famously went back to Brussels to get extensions. We decided we had to prioritise first. This is the key here. First, delivering the referendum result and leaving the EU by any means necessary on the set date, which at the time was the 31st of October 2019. Now, we know that didn't happen because we left the EU. Technically, we left, I think, our membership position in the 1st of 2020, January 2020, and then we left the single market and customs union, I think, in 21, hence the border issues. So that's what my memory remembers. But so they actually missed their own deadline in a sense because that stuff wasn't passed until later on. Second, leaving in a way which imposed minimal constraints on the future, a way which did not leave us irrevocably subject to EU laws. So essentially they wanted the end of alignment. So what we're seeing here is they wanted Brexit by hook or by crook, even if they'd lie, to cheat, they didn't care, they would do it happily, get out of any kind of dynamic alignment. In other words, we wanted to give the country as much free choice as possible in the free trade agreement negotiations that would follow and make that negotiations as far as possible one between equals. But, the simple fact is we are not equals because the EU is so much more economically powerful than us. That's the difference. It's like going into a trade negotiation with the US. You're not going to win. You are not equals in that sense. That meant for political and legal reasons, our priority had to be renegotiating the backstop, taking the whole country out of the EU's customs union and redoing the political declaration. So essentially, he wanted to go into negotiations without having the kind of idea of dynamic alignment or anything like that. He wanted the UK to be out of all that stuff so we can get more of a Canada-style deal. Because if the backstop was still there, the trade and cooperation agreement probably wouldn't exist, because there would be no way of sorting out the border situation in Ireland. As Martin Howe QC correctly pointed out in his October 2019 article summarising the pros and cons of our deal, it is much more difficult to try and renegotiate an existing text than it would be to get the right result at the more fluid stage of the original negotiation. Which is funny, because they've actually tried to saying, he's saying it's more difficult to try and renegotiate an existing text than it would be to try and get it right the first time round in the original negotiation, except the irony is that is what he has done with the Northern Ireland Protocol. It was agreed in the text, the protocol, the withdrawal agreement, all of this stuff was agreed, and then once it was passed, once Brexit was done, they've tried to renegotiate it. So his point there doesn't make any sense in terms of what happened next. So again, this man, he doesn't make sense. He goes, in doing this, we had to ensure that the new arrangements for Northern Ireland reflected the balance of interests and concerns embodied in the Good Friday Agreement in all three strands. That was our overriding goal in this area, yet you're the only ones threatening the Good Friday Agreement. Strange. We always knew that this would require some special arrangements covering Northern Ireland, which the EU knew as well. Everyone knew this, because of the situation in Northern Ireland. He goes, we never contemplate any sorts of checks or process taking part at the land border, so within the island of Ireland. But we also knew unionist concerns had to be recognised, except you didn't recognise unionist concerns. You just lied to them. And the fundamental unity of the UK single market and customs union territory had to be respected. But you didn't respect it though, because you separated the UK single market and customs territory. Do you guys see what I'm saying? He's not making sense here. He goes, by early September, the Ben Burt, quote, Surrender Act, which was just an effort to stop us leaving without a deal, was in place, the practical effect of which was to make it impossible to leave the EU without some kind of, with a deal of some kind. We know, given the situation now, how bad Brexit is for our trade. Could you imagine tariffs on top of that? It would be unviable for exports. By removing the walkaway option, this massively weakened our negotiating hand. Let's not forget that the UK scrapped physical checks on EU goods. In a trade war, we'd get stomped because we wouldn't even be able to compete in the trade war. So trade-offs were inevitable, but it was simply not possible to get everything we wanted. And it feels like this is Frost trying to rewrite the past so history remembers him more kindly. I don't think history will remember him kindly. He says, we put forward the proposals we did in early October. The proposal was that to minimise friction at the land border and give pre-existing arrangements, we were ready to agree Northern Ireland would have to align with EU SPS and EU manufactured goods rules. We recognise these agreements would entail some process in the Irish Sea, but we believe that most of them could be done behind the border. So it doesn't really make much sense unless you're going to do most of them like in GB. That sentence doesn't make sense. We were not, however, prepared to put Northern Ireland into a different custom zone to that of the rest of the UK, but effectively he did. Northern Ireland is in the EU's customs union. It's not in ours. So, he's saying we weren't prepared to do this, but he did it. He goes, the crucial new element was consent. We believe the only way it could be acceptable for any part of the UK to be subject to EU legislation and institutions without a say was if there was a periodic consent by the Northern Ireland people through their democratic institutions. Stormont, there'll be a consent vote in 24 on it, but then you've got the government talking about they might override the consent vote because they're not happy with the fact that Sinn Féin might be the biggest party there. But I think this is more talk from the government, which love to bluster. He goes, this offer was supported by virtually all Conservatives. The DUP described it as a serious and sensible way forward, probably because the DUP never anticipated that they would be the ones to be voted out in Stormont. I think what they thought could happen is if this thing goes south in 24, they can just vote against the Northern Ireland Protocol and get rid of it. In the 15 days that followed, it became clear that the EU would look to Ireland to judge whether the consent arrangements were agreeable, and Ireland would look to the EU to judge the rest, which makes sense given that Ireland would have to deal with any kind of fallout from this. They would be the main victims of it, so that makes sense. He says, we unlocked the consent arrangements at Wirral meeting with Varadkar on the 10th of October. It was clear Ireland wanted to see a deal. Unfortunately, I think ceding to EU pressure, Ireland would not agree to a consent vote in Northern Ireland to go into the proposed arrangements, yet Ireland did agree to it because there is a consent mechanism in there. So it doesn't make sense. He's trying to argue that the EU pressured Ireland into accepting the consent agreement, but then Ireland could have rejected it if they wanted to. Again, it doesn't make sense. But of course, the EU is always the villain here. Because the problems came in Brussels, it was clear that the Commission doubted we had the political backing to get a deal through, which makes sense given that Theresa May failed so many times. On the 17th of October, the last day which allowed time to complete parliamentary process, in my opinion, they were hoping that political developments would see Brexit reversed, particularly after the Supreme Court's prorogation ruling, which, it's fair enough. If the EU wanted Brexit reversed, that's fine. I've got no issue with them wanting that, but they didn't drag this out. It was on us. We're the ones who couldn't get through stuff through our own parliament, not the EU. As a result, they turned the screws. Talks happened when and in the EU, in the configuration that EU wanted, because you're negotiating with the bigger power. That's why, because we're a member of them. It'll be on their terms. My negotiating team was treated brutally as the supplicant representatives of a renegade province. I mean, again, it's just a joke what he's saying here. He goes, culminating us being shut in the meeting room in Berniamont until 2 a.m. Like, you're telling me they told you couldn't leave. I wouldn't be surprised if they thought you were going to leak stuff to the media, but like, come on, dude. You're telling me they said, no, you can't leave until a certain time. Like, get out of here. On the final night of the talks, while the Commission debated whether they wanted to sign off on the deal, we put up with it because we wanted to get this done. The brave patriot, Lord Frost, waited in a hotel until 2 a.m. with his team in order to get this done, because he's a patriot. He goes, substantively, the EU insisted on application of the EU's customs rules, with the only redeeming feature the provisions that there should be no tariffs on goods at risk of going into the Republic of Ireland, the details of which were to be worked out later. And if Frost was so concerned about this, he would have worked out the details now. That was a key problem, because that's where they keep moaning about stuff. But the details should have been hammered out early on during negotiations. Because although we were able to agree some important language, notably to agree Northern Ireland's status in the UK's customs territory, a crucial difference from the backstop, we could do nothing in these circumstances about the EU's insistence that EU customs rules should nonetheless apply, because goods can go freely between NI to any EU member state. So it would make sense that they would be in the EU's custom rules territory. That makes sense. Otherwise, you'd allow lower standard goods right into your single market. Because this was the straw that broke the DUP's back. They withdrew their support and we faced a very difficult decision, not least because we, as it turned out correctly, had also huge doubts about the workability and political implications of the customs agreements. We faced a choice: take this deal, try and get it through Parliament, sort out the details in 2020 while we were negotiating the trade agreement, and it bears repeating that no one knew we'd actually get the trade and cooperation agreement, or walk away, fail to deliver Brexit on the 31st of October, and most likely see the government collapse, which probably would have happened. I think if they failed to get this through, the Tories were a minority government with no coalition at this point. I think that would have been it for Johnson, but, that's not what happened. At that point, we would have seen, at best, a second referendum, quite possibly, Brexit taken off the agenda for good, and who knows what the consequences are of domestic policy. But, Johnson effectively got the Northern Ireland Protocol, he got the withdrawal agreement from the EU, and the opposition parties allowed him to have an election on it. And, I blame the Lib Dem leader at the time, the lady, I can't remember her name. I blame the SNP and I blame Labour for that. They should have got together, never allowed a general election to happen. But they were naive. Because we decided the lesser risk was to push the deal through and trust that we could sort the detail out with the EU later. Even though you agreed with the gentleman in 2019 that the best thing to do is sort out the details whilst the negotiations are ongoing, rather than after they're done and already agreed upon and voted in. Like, he doesn't make sense, man. Because as it turned out, we had to go through the election to deliver it, but deliver it we did, and Brexit happened, which is true, because as Frost said earlier, regardless of what happened, he wanted to get Brexit done, and boy did he. Because my conclusion is that this protocol was the only realistic detail available given our unsatisfactory starting point in 2019. Was it a rough starting point? Yes. Did it have to pan out like this? No. I do not believe Brexit would have happened if we had not taken it, and therefore it is overwhelmingly likely it would still be part of the EU now, which is probably true. The consequences of that, both for our political system and for any influence we had in the EU afterwards, would have been highly damaging. I don't think it would have damaged our position in the EU that much, but I think for our political system it would have been very damaging, given how important these people made Brexit to be. Because I hear people say that we could have reopened the deal after winning the election. Frankly, I think they are kidding themselves. We won the election with an oven-ready deal that got Brexit done, yet these people keep talking about unfinished business. But it's true, there's no way the EU would have reopened negotiations at that point. It was, you got what you wanted, bye. Because that's how negotiations work. You can't go back. It'd be stupid. Because my personal view at this point is that the deal would probably last until the first consent vote in 24, but I think right now, I think that might not be the case. Because that's what they gambled on. You know, worst case scenario, it'd be here for about 4 years. But that's not what happened. Because I expected that we would do so much domestic reform and change within Great Britain between 2020 and 2024 that it would be self-evidently attractive to Northern Ireland to end the protocol and put some arrangements in place. But the problem is, the Stormont elections are happening now, and I don't know how long the elections last for, or like how their term lasts for, but I'm assuming it's about probably like 4 or 5 years, so that's not going to happen now. Because I also thought that once we left, the atmosphere between us and the EU would change. It's become much less fraught and tense, as we put the bad days behind us. But you know, you're the one who made the bad days worse, my friend. You're the one with the unilateral actions, and your constant saber rattling has made it much, much worse. And therefore we would be able to find ways of implementing the protocol in practice, which kept it workable and ensured it would remain compatible with the Belfast Agreement. So let's really think about this, because I think someone called Mustafa Rahman, he sums it up a lot better, which is senior officials have found Frost's intervention this week surprisingly honest. He negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol to get Brexit done and stay in power. Now he wants rid of it to win an election and stay in power. I don't think the Northern Ireland Protocol will define whether they win or lose their next election. I think they've got a lot of other things to deal with. Nothing to do with unionism, economics, global Britain, just Tories' pursuit of power, which is true. And this is a decent summary of it, but I just agree with this bit here. But the simple fact is that the only reason the Northern Ireland Protocol came about was because the Tories needed something to run with. They needed something to say, okay, look, we got an agreement with the EU, we can get this through, everything will be fine, we can finally get Brexit done, it's oven ready, you know, once you vote us in, it's done. That's it, that's what they needed, because Labour were talking about, I think, a second referendum at the time. That was Keir Starmer's policy he pushed for, and I think that was also the members' policy as well. That's what the members wanted. The Lib Dems were, you know, kind of irrelevant, sort of, and the SNP don't have a large party, but I think they also would have wanted a second referendum. So given that, you know, the Tories wanted something that we can say, once you vote us in, it's done. No more faffing around, no more second referendum, it's finished. Even though the irony is the Tories and the Telegraph keep talking about unfinished business. Ironic. But anyways, you know, I'm going to wrap this one up here. How long have we been going for? Probably ages. About 23 minutes. But, you know, I think this is a good enough summary of Frost's interpretation of the origins of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that they were given a bum hand, essentially. They did their best with what they had, and their idea was just get this thing through and renegotiate some parts of it later on, essentially. That's what it seemed to be their idea, and especially given that, you know, there was a gentleman he cited which said that it's better to get things done in the negotiations before the text is formed, voted upon and implemented, because it's much harder to change things then. But if he demanded things like the command paper back in 2019, the EU would have told him to get lost. So yeah, I don't know what more to say on this one, but it's been a long old video. Hopefully someone watches it to the end. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. There's 2 more bits of this, which is the why the protocol isn't working, should we say, the current situation, and then what Frost believes is the future of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which should be fun to cover. Let me know what you think in the comments, everyone, and yeah, hopefully I'll catch you next time. So in this segment, we're going to carry on talking about the Frost speech that he did fairly recently about the Northern Ireland Protocol. We spoke previously about where Frost talks about the origins of the protocol. In this one, we're going to talk about what went wrong in his opinion. Just a caveat with the point, obviously, that, you know, the EU officials have found his approach fairly honest. that he negotiated the protocol to get Brexit done and stay in power. That was the whole thing, to win power in that 2019 election. So he didn't really care about the protocol as such until it came into effect. So he says, clearly things did not work out like that, as you mentioned before. And here I turn to the second theme of my speech, where did it go wrong? I don't want to go through the detail of what happened in 2020 while we were in the transition period, not least because my focus at the time was on the mammoth task of delivering what became of the TCA rather than implementing the provisions of the protocol through the Joint Committee. So Frost had that 2020 seemed like a very busy year for him, because instead of focusing on the Northern Ireland Protocol to make it work in 2021, he had to deal with getting the TCA. That's why, Brexit kind of, the bandwidth that these ministers have is not a lot. Frost isn't the smartest guy around, and he had a lot to do in terms of his job. And yes, you can argue he accepted it and blah, 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 but this is more Boris Johnson and British government failing of not having someone separately to negotiate the trade agreement. He goes, there the withdrawal agreement required a minister to be in charge, and the task was accordingly given to Michael Gove, who was not very good. First, it became quite clear that the EU had not absorbed either that we genuinely wanted a Canada-style free trade agreement rather than a high alignment future deal, or what we had determined on leaving the transition period at the end of 2020. So he's going to argue that. I think Barnier, from what I read earlier, Barnier always kind of guessed the UK wanted a Canada-style deal. So he might have wanted some sort of agreements on alignment or a certain level of standards. That's what has in the TCA, that the UK cannot backslide on the standards that we had at the time. So we cannot deregulate certain aspects of worker rights, etc., without facing problems with the TCA being suspended or parts of it. So I don't agree with what Frost is saying here entirely. He says, I don't think that they really realised we were serious on either point until the deadline to extend the transition period had passed in June. As a result, the first half of the year, both in my negotiation and in Michel Barnier's, was largely shadowboxing, and the time to work through detail got squeezed accordingly. So he's arguing that, once the deadline extension, the request had passed, that's when Barnier, in Frost's opinion, thought, okay, things are real now, we need to get this done. I don't think that's the case, to be honest with you. Secondly, once they did realise this, we saw the Northern Ireland Protocol start to be weaponised in the talks. That's not really true, is it? How did he... They didn't really weaponise it. Obviously, a free trade agreement was needed because for goods going to GB to NI, there would be tariffs placed, and then those tariffs would have to be... they would have to request a rebate on them, essentially, if there was no trade agreement. He goes, Northern Ireland Protocol became weaponised. It's not true. Said to shape the agreement, but to try to take away our no-deal option. But the thing is, right, he acknowledged in the first bit of his speech, right, there was always the possibility that there would be a no deal. And so he agreed to the Northern Ireland Protocol to get the withdrawal agreement, to get Brexit done and win an election. So his arguing here that the Northern Ireland Protocol is weaponised is absolute rubbish. He goes, they wanted to present us with a situation whereby if there was a no deal, the protocol's provisions for third country tariffs on goods moving to Northern Ireland would apply, and the at-risk provision would never be worked out reasonably. The thing is, right, the at-risk provisions has never really been worked out. This mainly for pretty much all goods going from GB to NI. The EU and the UK have never fully worked out what the UK wanted with regards to at-risk provisions. They did talk about trusted trader schemes, etc., but the EU put it in originally what would happen, what goods need to be checked originally in the Northern Ireland Protocol. So for the UK to argue the at-risk bit provisions, they were already agreed on, if that makes sense. And also the fact is arguing the Northern Ireland Protocol is weaponised is simply not the case. This is the reality of not getting a trade deal at the time. He's admitting himself that he didn't put in the provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Maybe he didn't care for it that much because he always believed they would repeal it at some point. That's what is very stupid, in my opinion. He says, we faced various threats in the talks that Northern Ireland would be cut off, which Northern Ireland is cut off. You cannot deny that. It's cut off, but it's cut off by the Westminster government. He goes that we would not be able to move 1 kilo of butter from GB to NI, and that is that agri-food rules and standards might be used to ban some movements altogether, which is fine. The argument here that we would not be able to move 1 kilo of butter from GB to NI is nonsense, because they would be able to, but the problem is it wouldn't be economically viable because of the amount of the costs involved in it. Does that make sense? Because it would be so expensive, because you've got customs checks, you've got vet checks, you've got SPS checks, you've got all of the checks that would happen for a product such as butter. So it wouldn't be viable. So his arguing here that that GB wouldn't be able to move things is rubbish, absolute rubbish. It wouldn't be economically viable, but that's what the Northern Ireland Protocol was. So it's absolute nonsense, this bit here, absolute nonsense. He goes, that is third, the background to the notwithstanding clause, the UK internal market bill leaked by our internal opponents in late August. That, I think that's nonsense as well. I think they leaked parts of the internal market bill, just like they leaked parts of the bill, the new bill that they were supposedly making about scrapping bits of the Northern Ireland Protocol in British law. Absolute nonsense. They did this on purpose. He goes, we acknowledge that these clauses would, if used, breach the provisions of the protocol. We thought it was a necessary evil to ensure the UK had the powers needed to make it clear that we would never allow tariffs within the UK to the UK's kind of single market or customs union, and to underline that the EU had to take seriously the no-deal outcome in the FTA talks. Evidently, the EU did take the no-deal outcome seriously. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had this conversation up here. He goes, to make it clear, we would never allow tariffs, blah, blah, blah. These UKIM provisions, internal market provisions, understandably cause fury on the EU side, which is what they were designed to do. He says, though they were always very careful not to let outrage get in the way of FTA talks, and rightly so, unless understandably among those UK parliamentarians who prioritise an EU relationship over the unity of the country, which isn't really true, because at the end of the day, those UK parliamentarians knew that the EU was our largest single trading partner. So obviously you don't want bad terms with your largest single trading partner, because otherwise you're not going to be trading much, are you? He goes, in the end, we did enough to get what we wanted, a Canada-style, fully zero tariff agreement, which removed us from any kind of EU jurisdiction while respecting reasonable fair competition concerns. But, you know, if we wanted to get away from the EU completely, why did we acknowledge fair competition concerns? Doesn't make sense, does it? Also, the fact that, you know, Boris Johnson claimed in 2019 there would be no non-tariff barriers, but there were non-tariff barriers. So, more nonsense. There's this, together with the elimination of tariffs, meant that we were able to drop the notwithstanding clauses from the UK Iron Bill. I think they leaked this, right, to try and force something from the EU, which they didn't get. They wanted to make it look like they were doing something, because they got rid of the clauses anyways. He goes, though I must admit that if I had known then what I know now, I would have argued for them to be maintained, uncommenced, but capable of being reactivated if necessary, and if they were activated, it would either go to court very, very quickly, or the TCA would get suspended. That's why they were never kept in. Once again, we reached a point where we believed and hoped that normal service would be resumed with the EU, but he doesn't define really what normal service with the EU is. He goes, we knew the protocol and other aspects of the withdrawal agreement would be tricky, but that we believed that the trader support service, removing most day-to-day burdens of form filling, coupled with a more constructive EU relationship, more broadly would make the situation more manageable. The thing with a trusted trader scheme, you know, I don't know how many countries would actually use them for a start. And also the fact that if you believed a trusted trader scheme would work, why didn't you argue for that in 2019? Why are you arguing for it now when you know it's far harder to change a formalised and implemented agreement than it is one that's in flux, that one that is being written? It doesn't make sense. During January 2021, it seemed that the protocol could be made to work. It was never going to be made to work. That's why he had to take unilateral actions. Because its provisions came to force, and although there were some short-run shortages in Northern Ireland supermarkets, there were a lot of shortages. You know, there were a lot of shortages in Northern Ireland initially. They mainly disappeared quickly and were arguably no worse than the rest of the UK. It's not the bar you really want to jump, but that's mainly because I think they were importing goods from, you know, the EU and predominantly from Ireland. At the time, because a lot of UK exporters don't want to deal with Northern Ireland anymore because it's just the expense of paperwork and all the other stuff. So it's just comical that he's arguing this. He doesn't explain how the shortages were overcome. Because that came to an end on the 29th of January last year with the EU's ham-fisted triggering of Article 16. He said, we had been told repeatedly, incorrectly, but repeatedly over the last 5 years that it was impossible to bring into play any new processes at the land border, which is true. And this is where he's going to argue about the Article 16 thing. He goes, we've been told there could be no new restrictions on north-south movements. That is why we had the protocol. The EU turned around and said, in pandemic conditions that are already extremely fraught, and just hours after President Macron denounced the AZ vaccine as quasi-ineffective. Now, he's arguing that, you know, Macron was angry at the AZ vaccine, but the EU changed the rules and blah blah blah. There's a reason why the AstraZeneca vaccine was not given to people below I think it's the age of 30. There was a reason for that. He goes, this passage of time dimmed the memories of how extraordinary the proposal was. The EU's rapid retreat from it, so triggering Article 16, when someone in the Commission said we could use Article 16 to stop vaccines going from Ireland to Northern Ireland, to keep them in the EU single market effectively, or keep them within the EU. That didn't happen. Someone proposed it and it was shut down very quickly. So to make this argument is just in bad faith, to be honest with you. He goes, the whole moral basis for the protocol had been destroyed in unionism's eyes. Not really. Not really, not at all. He goes, it had shown that the EU's interest came first. No, it didn't, because it showed you Ireland's interest came first. Because it was the Taoiseach who called someone in the Commission and said, what are you doing? Sit down and shut up. Do not do this. So it wasn't in the EU's interest. If it was in the EU's interest, they would have done this. They would have triggered Article 16. They would have stopped the vaccines going into Northern Ireland from Ireland. And that would have been that. But that didn't happen, did it, Frost? Because it wasn't the EU's interest. It was in Ireland's interest to stop this. He goes, the situation has never recovered. That's not true. The situation would have recovered. You keep banging on about it, big man. He goes, unionist consent has been destroyed, but you never asked for unionist consent in the first place. Why are you making it a big deal now? Because unionist politics have gone haywire, and the protocol is never going to be operable as envisioned. So his whole argument is, the protocol could have worked, right? He goes, the protocol could have worked in January 2021, even though we know it's not true. But then he argues because the EU said they might trigger Article 16, it blew the whole thing apart. Absolute rubbish. The protocol is never going to work because the people who were meant to implement it, the British government, never wanted it to work. That's the top and bottom of it. That's the reality of the situation. He goes, it might have been better to point out the EU's vaccine proposals would have used a mechanism very much like those we had proposed for customs in autumn 2019, but we had been told they were impossible because you'd be putting in a de facto hard border within Ireland for certain goods. We should have said, fine, you have set a very low bar for the use of Article 16, noted, you have shown it is in fact possible to control goods going across the land border. But the thing is, had the EU done this, I think the IRA could have done, would have resorted to some sort of violence around the border checks. I think that could have been a very much a reality of the situation, because we will allow the UK standard goods to circulate in Northern Ireland and put in place arrangements to stop them getting into the single market. How would you stop them going from Northern Ireland to Ireland? I don't get it. You never explain that bit, do you? You've never explained how it's possible, because in fairness, the EU Commission never explained how they were going to stop vaccines going from Ireland to Northern Ireland. They never explained how they were going to do that. Just like Frost here has never explained how he's going to stop goods going from Northern Ireland to Ireland. Do you see what I'm saying? Is we would have had the moral high ground to act in circumstances where a challenge would have been very difficult. It's true, we would have had the moral high ground, but we don't, because we continuously did far worse than threaten to use Article 16. We used constant unilateral actions, constant sabre rattling, and constantly arguing this isn't what we agreed on. The interpretation and implementation we kept arguing about, even though we knew that we were on thin ground. We got the Americans spoke to us about this, EU representatives spoke to us about this. I think other nation states even talked to us about this. Don't mess around in Northern Ireland. Don't do this again. Because it took an international effort, a real international effort, to get peace in Northern Ireland. Frost goes, that was to say the protocol was not workable, but without being able to effectively point at the EU for making it so, because that's what he wanted. He wanted to say the protocol won't work and it's the EU's fault, and he never got that. He never was given that kind of arrow, if that makes sense. Because we faced a storm of criticism as we first tried to place mitigations and then propose changes to the protocol. Our opponents rightly sensed we were on weak ground and we could be made to suffer it. How at this point could you be on weak ground? You had a stonking majority. How are you on weak ground at this point? This is what you've made for yourself. Because indeed the EU took the opportunity to double down by responding to our low-key extensions of grace period. They weren't low-key. They weren't. And the EU did nothing. There was no legal action. There was nothing that happened. He goes, in areas such as pet passports and non-commercial parcels, by immediately beginning infraction proceedings, which would end at the Court of Justice. What happened was the UK kept threatening to suspend parts of the protocol and taking unilateral actions. The EU said, fine, we'll see you in court. But then the EU paused it, didn't they? Even when the UK took more unilateral action during the summer of 2020, was it 2021? I think it was. Even though the UK took more unilateral actions, they used it to fine. You know, they didn't go to court or anything. I was surprised they didn't. I was surprised they paused legal action. But the simple fact is, if they wanted to go to the Court of Justice, it would have done. Frost doesn't mention this though, does he? He doesn't mention the bit about the pausing of legal action. I wonder why. He goes, the EU has been able to refuse any renegotiation of the protocol because we agreed to it. You know, these are two sovereigns agreeing to an international agreement regarding Northern Ireland, regarding Brexit. You can't just go back and rewrite it. This isn't, you know, the 1800s where you could make up agreements and then get rid of them because might equals right. You can't do that anymore. He says, while making minor concessions to keep the upper hand. What do you mean? Making minor concessions to keep the upper hand? They did what's in the interest of the people in Northern Ireland because they spoke to businesses. They spoke to people and said, what are the issues? Or what can we do to make your life easier? What are the tweaks we can make to the protocol? And they did that with medicines. They did that with meats and other things. It's ridiculous in what he's saying. It is why we had to justify the use of Article 16. Just do it then. Do it. See what happens. See how fast it caves in on you. He goes, while facing a very serious counter threats from our friends in the EU if we do, because you don't have the legal standing to do it. If you did, it would go to arbitration or it would go to the courts. That's what would happen. And if you think you're in the right, do it then. But you know you're not. At least he won't do it. Why? Because he knows the consequences. They don't have the legal standing to do this. Even if it went to arbitration, the UK would lose. Because they have to explain how it's unforeseen circumstances. And, you know, based on this article here from an ex-Stormont official, they've got no standing. But yeah, it's a ridiculous article. You know, cherry picking certain aspects. What do we expect from Frost? He talks about the EU taking legal action and going to the Court of Justice, when the simple fact is they paused legal action. He doesn't mention that. So again, you know, Frost proves himself once again to be a dodgy actor. But anyways, look, we're going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. Genuinely interested to know what people's thoughts on these are. They're very long videos. I mean, this one's about 17 minutes, but the guy talks endlessly. I mean, this article is so long, this transcript. But we're going to do a what should happen now. In Frost's opinion, there's quite a bit left to talk about in another video. Then what I'll do is I'll piece this together and just kind of fuse it, if that makes sense. But yeah, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you hopefully in part 3. So in this segment, the final part of the 3-part series on Frost, which is on the Northern Ireland Protocol, we covered Frost's opinion on the origins of the protocol. We covered Frost's opinion on what went wrong with the protocol in his opinion, which some bits obviously wrong, and what should happen now in his opinion. So this should be quite a fun bit, just to see how badly or how rightly he actually goes for this one, because the EU officials actually gave him some credit for being honest, which is fair, because I think he was, for the most part, as honest as he could be anyways. So we'll go for what should happen now. 3-part series. If you haven't watched the first 2, please watch them, and I'm going to piece this together into one really long video. It should be like an hour long or something. But anyways, here we are now. We are here. We are where we are. We have to face the fact that we are in a very serious situation. It's pretty clear, and serious commentators agree that the Belfast Agreement is on life support. I don't think it is. I think that I actually, do you know what? I'm probably not the person to comment on that. It's difficult to see the results of next week's elections doing much to help. So this is the day after this is on the 6th. I'm recording this one. We still haven't got the results from the Northern Ireland Stormont election yet, so I'll keep an eye out for that. I'll cover that at some point, no worries. He goes, to state the obvious, this matters because, as I said at the start of these remarks, the purpose of the protocol was to protect and support the Good Friday Agreement. That was the understood objective of the negotiations on both sides. That is why it's explicit in the text, precisely to avoid any assumption that the later treaty supersedes the earlier one, but rather that one supports the other, which makes sense. Given how hard it was to get the Good Friday Agreement, the Northern Ireland Protocol does support it in the sense of it stops a hard border in the island of Ireland and puts it in the Irish Sea between GB and NI. But the main, I think in my opinion at least, the main things that are causing the violence in Northern Ireland is, of course, poverty. Northern Ireland is economically not that great. There aren't a lot of opportunities, and the Tories haven't done a lot to really help out. In fact, they've made it worse through their austerity policies, and Brexit as well has taken a lot of money out of Northern Ireland, which is a problem. Also, the fact that the government keep riling up unionists because they are looking. I think genuinely, some of the people in the cabinet, at least, it feels like they want to use the societal aspect of the Northern Ireland Protocol to cause violence, so they can trigger Article 16 and say our justification is the violence erupting in Northern Ireland because of the protocol. Because how it worked, and how it feels to be working is cabinet officials or maybe even ministers are feeding information to the DUP about the protocol being suspended, the DUP then feeding it back to unionist communities, and the thing is, once those deadlines pass, those certain people in the unionist committees, the more radical people, they start causing violence, causing trouble, etc. He goes, at the moment the protocol is doing the reverse. The strain it is causing are actively damaging the Good Friday Agreement, but the simple fact is, if the UK wanted to avoid the situation in Northern Ireland, they would just agree to dynamic alignment with the EU and it would get rid of the vast majority of problems. It is therefore surely obvious, indeed it is inescapable logical conclusion, the protocol can't operate as it stands. It has to be renegotiated or removed. That's simply not true. I don't think the protocol is causing some damage because people in Northern Ireland feel like they have been separated from GB, at least the more radical unionists have. But I think the best thing to do is to make the protocol work as best they can, to set up border facilities and to have as close alignment as we can with the EU in order to avoid as many border checks as possible. If you want to get goods from GB to NI as easily as possible, either try and rejoin the EU single market if it's possible and customs union for goods, or get dynamic alignment. It's the only way. Because that decision for now is with the government, because it won't be renegotiated or removed. The only way it'd be removed is via the consent mechanism, and based on the fact that there will be over 50% of MLAs in Stormont who either tolerate or are favourable of the Northern Ireland Protocol, they'll get consent. Unionism is, of course, fragmented and has its own political issues to work through. That is for unionist parties to sort out, which is true. You've got the the UUP and the DUP and probably one or two others. What worries me, though, is that some of the unionists seem recently to have given into the temptation of accusing Her Majesty's government of bad faith, which is true, though. Absolutely, they should be accusing Her Majesty's government of bad faith. They've set crappy deadlines they could never have adhered to. They lied consistently to the DUP. They lied consistently to unionist communities about suspending the protocol, etc., and doing stuff. And they've created a situation where, for these unionists in Northern Ireland, democracy doesn't seem to work. That's the situation that they've created. Allegedly, is showing no regard to the interests of Northern Ireland in agreeing to the protocol in the first place, which is absolutely 100% correct. If the Her Majesty's government really cared about unionists, I want anyone who's a unionist in Northern Ireland to listen to this carefully. If Her Majesty's government really cared about you, they would never have agreed to the Northern Ireland Protocol, because they knew, according to an ex-Stormont official, that this is the situation that would happen because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So for anyone to argue that they didn't know what they voted for is simply not true. Because in most respects of national life, Northern Ireland is fully part of the UK and operates to UK rules, but the simple fact is unionists either haven't been told that or they don't accept that. Even in the narrower trade area, trade and services, 70% of the economy is governed by UK rules, not EU rules. The union exists and is meaningful, but the thing is, you keep riling up people in Northern Ireland because they don't see that. He says, I know the PM has to go through agonies over some of the tough decisions he has to take. If all he gets is criticism, then it makes it much harder to work up political support to deal with the consequences. Or if people keep saying mean things to him, he won't be able to do his job. He's not a 5-year-old. Grow up. Unionist criticism is best directed to the EU and the Commission, who puts in the position. Big ban, yeah. Did the EU vote for Brexit? No. Did the EU vote for the Tories in 2019? No. Did the EU come up with the Northern Ireland Protocol? No. That was all you. Maybe not the referendum bit, but the 2019 election, that was you. Who lied to the unionists in Northern Ireland? Was it the Commission or was it you? You're the ones who said there's no border in the Irish Sea. So do not try and blame the EU and the Commission. This is all on you. The only blame I put on the EU and the EU Commission is to come up with such a deal with a bunch of charlatans, honestly. They clearly did not realise who they were dealing with. Some unionists also give the impression of believing there was a pre-protocol world where Northern Ireland was treated exactly the same as any other part of the UK, and where it's true that did exist under Theresa May. Theresa May's deal would have kept the entirety of the UK in the EU single market and customs union. He goes, a world where political nationalism does not exist, but we have seen political nationalism. We've seen English nationalism in the UK, where one of the DUP MPs actually said that the Tories are suffering from English nationalism. They're obsessed with the Red Wall. Is once again, I do not think it makes sense to advocate this vision where political nationalism doesn't exist. It's a bit strange. Nationalism is the reason we're in this mess in the first place. English nationalism. However, the protocol is amended or replaced, the successor arrangements need to respect the interests of nationalism and need to keep up north-south contacts as well as east-west ones. But it doesn't really deal with east-west relations, does it? In that sense, as I've often said, we will always need special arrangements with the EU to deal with Northern Ireland. That's what the Northern Ireland Protocol is. It's special arrangements between the two groups. Like, the EU knew that the Northern Ireland needed special arrangements, hence why the protocol exists. Come on, man. So yeah, you know, we do live in a world where nationalism exists. Unionists should be listened to, yes, but so should Irish nationalists as well. They should be listened to as well. You know, you can't argue like, oh, only one side needs to be listened to. It doesn't make sense. He goes, my second comment is on Ireland. Of course, I do not have any say or influence over how Ireland defines its interest, but because Irish people talk about British politics, Frost thinks it should work the other way around, which is fine. No one's saying you can't do anything. He goes, the reality is that at most of the crucial moments of the last 5 years, Ireland chose to throw its weight behind the EU interests and prioritise protecting the single market. No, what Ireland did was to protect people in Northern Ireland and to stop the troubles breaking out again. That's what they did. They did everything they could to stop a hard border in the island of Ireland. That's what they put their weight behind. Protecting the EU single market was important. It's probably secondary to a repeat of the Troubles. I don't understand how Frost can't understand that. And instead of working collaboratively with us to find solutions that can actually work in Northern Ireland. But the thing is, they did though. That's what the Northern Ireland Protocol was. Ireland, you admit in this article or in this speech, Ireland took the lead on certain aspects of Brexit, of the negotiations. So you admit that, you know, parts of the protocol were dealt with specifically by Ireland, and now you're saying Ireland should have worked with the UK more when it works for a collaborative effort with the EU. Like, you deal with the EU, not just with Ireland. It doesn't make sense. That's like if the EU had some sort of spat with Scotland, they wouldn't go specifically to Scotland, they would go through Westminster. Come on, man. Because I understand why it's done that. If it's been cut off from the single market itself, which is true, you know, Ireland benefits massively from the EU single market. He goes, I hope Ireland feels that it's got good value from the EU acting like this, which obviously it has done. Ireland's doing pretty good. He goes, though it doesn't look 100% clear to me that it has, and certainly its negotiating capital on the subject seems to be exhausted. I don't think it is. I genuinely don't. I think Ireland's still got a lot of capital left. They'll be the ones leading negotiations anyways, because they're the ones impacted most. He goes, we should ourselves, of course, continue to work constructively with Ireland bilaterally. Again, why are you trying to bypass the EU Commission here and the EU Parliament by trying to go directly with Ireland, a country that we colonised for hundreds of years? He goes, but I would like to see Ireland acting in the same spirit. They are acting in the same spirit. They are still talking to us. He goes, not disrupting the balance in Northern Ireland by constantly using a vague and destabilising language about tectonic shifts in the north, or by talking up a supposed all-Ireland economy. Now, I have not heard many Irish politicians, right? I don't follow this closely enough, right? It's not my area of expertise. No, I don't have one, but I don't follow Irish politics a lot. As far as I know of, Irish politicians haven't really talked about a unified Ireland. They haven't. Sinn Féin are barely talking about a unified Ireland, Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, because they know that that subject can be politically toxic to people. What they have done is focus on day-to-day issues like the cost of living crisis, inflation being around the 8-9% mark, going to hit the 10% mark at the end of the year, surging energy costs. You know, things that people genuinely care about. Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland haven't really talked about a united Ireland. I think Michelle O'Neill has been very quiet for a reason. It's because you want to get day-to-day issues. That's how you win. You can deal with this stuff later, just like the SNP have. The SNP have a mandate for an independence referendum in Scotland, but they haven't spoken about it because they want to get through these next hurdles. He goes, at a more prosaic level, to take one example, I would like to see Ireland operating like to see Ireland operating the common travel area, which Ireland do. The only ones stopping that are us, because we're saying that certain people will need passes and things like that. We're the ones who are trying to breach the common travel area. Because cooperation takes two, and sometimes it means taking tough decisions in the wider interest. I think you need to read this sentence again, Frost, and actually internalise it, because evidently you're asking Ireland to compromise here, but you yourself are not willing to compromise. Because we will need to see some sort of realism from the Irish government in the months to come. No. The realism aspect was the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's it. There's no other solution to this. You either put the border between GB and NI, you put the border in the island of Ireland, or you put the border around Ireland itself and take it out of the EU single market. That last one's never going to happen, because Ireland can stop that from happening. The second one never going to happen because of the Good Friday Agreement. The first one can happen because it has happened. That's it. It was the only viable one at the time, and it's still the only viable one now. He goes, now looking forward, I have 4 comments about the current situation. He goes, first, we have surely learned from the last few years that we cannot rely on the help of EU in Northern Ireland. It's not the case. Sefcovic has done extensive work trying to reduce the tariffs in Northern Ireland. Rubbish, absolute rubbish, the first point. Not tariffs, sorry, trying to resolve the issues in Northern Ireland. In fact, they have done more, I think, to lessen the burden of the protocol and talk to businesses and people in Northern Ireland than the British government have. Because the British government, all they understand is Article 16, and even then, their interpretation of Article 16 is wrong. We've gone through that already. Because I do not think they are operating in bad faith. I think you are operating in bad faith, though. I do not believe they see their own interests as coming first, reasonably enough. What? He's saying the EU says he says I do believe they see their own interests as coming first. Well, that's reasonably enough. As he admits, the EU want to protect their single market. Why have high standards if you're going to leave gaps in it? Because we should do the same, and we have every right to do so. And we are the government for the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland. Except you are the ones who separated Northern Ireland out from the rest of the UK. That was you. You did that. So you can't come back around and say, oh, we really love you, Northern Ireland, we're always there for you, we always care for you, and I miss you, and I need you. You can't do that, bruv. You can't do that. Because you're talking rubbish. You were the one who set up the Northern Ireland Protocol. You see how frustrated I get with these people. The second, the international context has hugely changed, has it? Because the UK and the EU are working together closely to help Ukraine behind its common objectives, which is fine. That's not a hard one to do, though, because our relationship with Poland and the Baltics and other Central Europeans have become a hugely important element in managing the ongoing crisis. Because it may not be that some member states who in the past would have been content to tuck in behind a commission, France, Germany access, in imposing trade sanctions on the UK. But the thing is, though, what he forgets is if they want to suspend the trade and cooperation agreement, they can do so. It won't be about putting these won't be sanctions. These will be WTO tariffs. They don't have to put sanctions on us, because he's right. These other countries in Central Europe or whoever, Poland for example, they can stop sanctions being put on us. But I think if the TCA were to be suspended, I don't think there's much they can do. It depends on how the TCA will be suspended. Does that vote go to the EU Parliament? Does it go through the Commission? I'm not 100% sure. It could go to court, for example. The judges could bypass all of those, go to court, and they could be the ones to deal with it. So this argument here about sanctions, it's an okay argument, but the problem is they don't have to go to sanctions. They can just go to tariffs. That will destroy our exports. Imports will be fine because we don't check anything anyways, but our exports will be absolutely crippled, and exports to Northern Ireland will be dead because there will be tariffs imposed on them, or the EU would expect tariffs to be imposed. Because third, it remains surprising to me that the EU will not renegotiate the protocol. I mean, have you read the command paper? Oh wait, you wrote it, didn't you? It's a joke. Their professed view that the protocol is the only way to protect the Belfast Agreement would be self-evidently incorrect. Even if the protocol were not so obviously now undermining the agreement, negotiations will still be the best way forward. We have put forward reasonable and workable compromise proposals and a full legal text. Sorry if you can hear my mum in the background. What he's talking about is the command paper, which is a joke. Of course, the EU can, if they wish, say we have what we have we hold, which is true because it's signed, it's implemented, it's in international law. Because even though now the protocol is not being fully implemented, but then the EU can try and push us to fully implement them. It's up to them. but it's not obvious whether it's in the interest to be significantly responsible for the destruction of the Good Friday Agreement. I don't think the protocol will be the thing that destroys the Good Friday Agreement. It will be the Unionists who destroy it in the end. Is unless, of course, they define their interests differently as maintaining leverage of the UK, causing us political difficulties and creating incentives to keep us closely aligned with the EU. So again, he keeps saying, I don't accuse the EU of acting in bad faith, but he's still accusing them of acting in bad faith by using these sorts of arguments, saying the EU put their single market above the Good Friday Agreement, for example, because he's saying, if they don't change the protocol, then the Good Friday Agreement's in jeopardy. But it won't be the EU that have caused this. It would be the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is Brexit, really, and the Unionists. He goes, that would explain their behaviour. There is a reason why we cannot wait forever in the hopes of improving the protocol by consent. But surely consent is the best way to do this. And obviously the Americans, with President Joe Biden, who very much sees himself, I think, as an Irish American, has kept a very close eye on this. And yet he's not blaming the EU, he's blaming us. Goes fourth and finally, if the EU is not willing to work with us to improve the protocol, then Her Majesty's government has no choice but to act unilaterally. Personally, I've never had any difficulty with doing so at the right moment, but we will be in breach of international law. We will face potential sanctions. We will face definite tariffs if we do this. One option would be to act in a fairly limited way, they love using that phrase, to remove current pressure points, first by Article 16, perhaps more than once as difficulties arise, and to create new facts on the ground. That's a bit of a weird way to phrase it. But the simple fact is, the government needs to be very open about which bits are we struggling with. That's the problem. He goes, but also by making clear that it was the UK's intention to secure a negative consent vote in 2024. So the UK, this is why they're talking more about Article 16, right? Because chances are the MLAs won't vote against the protocol in 2024. That's what's clear in green here. It's quite funny, isn't it? He goes, but also making clear that it was the UK's intention to secure a negative vote. So that's why I think the DUP have been piping up more this year, because they realise they're not going to win in Stormont anymore. They're not going to have the votes necessary to get rid of the protocol in 2024. That's why the government have been talking about this so much. He goes, it may be that situation cannot sustain the current tensions over such a long period. If that is the Her Majesty's government judgment, then I think it should be entirely reasonable for the government to act unilaterally to override key elements of the protocol and domestic law, which the government have backed off from doing. I'll talk about that at some point. I've got a lot of topics to talk about. But the simple fact is, now that, democracy won't stop it, i.e. the MLAs in Stormont, who, if the people in Northern Ireland were genuinely against the protocol, they would be voting for anti-unionist parties, not Sinn Féin. Because that democracy doesn't work, we're going to get rid of it. We don't care how you vote. We do what we want. It's Britannia waves the rules, isn't it? He goes, I personally do not believe that acting against the protocol should or need raise any issues of wider UK compliance with international law. But the thing is, if we suspend parts of the protocol, we are in breach of international law. So this argument, we'll still be good people, right? He goes, our wider issues, our track record speaks for itself. What, like the illegal war in Iraq and Afghanistan? Does that speak for itself? Even the Bosnia intervention, which, according to some people, I think from what I've read, was the right thing to do. The UN didn't back it. I think we're even in breach of international law back then. Our record on human rights and international law is not very good for us. It's not good at all. If you looked at the people we sell weapons to, big boy. Because the UK is one of the most outspoken advocates of an international system based on agreed rules, but we break the rules. That's the key problem. He goes, it's worth remembering former Brexit Minister Stephen Barclay in Parliament on March 2019 relaying the government's legal view that if the objectives of the protocol were no longer being proportionately served by its provisions, because, for example, it was no longer protecting the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, it could be argued that there had been an unforeseen and fundamental change of circumstances affecting the essential basis of the treaty of which the UK consent had been given. So he's talking about here that if the Northern Ireland Protocol is damaging the Good Friday Agreement and it's not protecting the Good Friday Agreement, the protocol could be suspended. That was the then government's legal view under Theresa May with Stephen Barclay. Article 62 of the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties permits the termination of such a treaty in these circumstances. And again, if you can argue this successfully, then you should be happy for it to go to court. Then it's an EU-biased court, but There are times where the courts have voted against the Commission. We saw it in the case where the UK owes a lot of money in terms of customs duties and VAT, etc. Whilst we are still members of the EU, the courts ruled against the Commission's calculation of the fees and said come back with something concrete. So we have seen that happen where the Commission can get struck down by the courts. That was not the strongest example I cited, but it was one example. Because in any case, it is obvious that the protocol is different. There is almost no other international treaty like the withdrawal agreement and the protocol because Brexit was such a unique thing. The UK was not a fully sovereign power when it negotiated. That's not true. If we weren't a fully sovereign power, how did we manage to leave the EU and negotiate then? It doesn't make sense. Because the detail of the protocol's provisions was essentially imposed under duress because we had no walk-away option. That's not true either, though. You know, the argument that we couldn't go to no deal, that was the will of Parliament. Parliament was voted in by the people. So again, these arguments, they're rubbish. And it makes huge intrusions on UK domestic policy. Then why did you agree to it? Why did you come up with it? It doesn't make sense. Moreover, the protocol is not a permanent feature on our relationship, which is true. That's why the consent mechanism exists. And it's highly unusual in an international treaty. It can be voted out of existence by a legislature in one of the parties because it directly impacts Northern Ireland. So Stormont, which has powers over Northern Ireland, can decide whether it should stay or go. What happens then, I am not sure about, but it's up to the people in Northern Ireland to figure that out, or figure out if they want to keep it or not. That's the top and bottom of it. He goes, for these reasons, if Her Majesty's government has to act against it, it would be entirely wrong and unwarranted to draw any wider conclusions about our attitudes of international law. I mean, that's not true either. If you break international law, you break international law. It doesn't matter about the context that you broke it in. The government will need to rally its supporters in Parliament. I mean, they're looking very gone at this point. Because I hope that parliamentarians in our party, but also in the Labour opposition, will be ready to look through the inevitable sound and fury and keep in mind the importance of protecting the union on which this United Kingdom depends on, which is ironic because people, a certain MP, I can't remember his name, I covered him probably last month, said Labour are actually better for Northern Ireland than the Tories are. He goes, the best of both our major political parties have always stood for this, except you haven't though. The best of both our major political parties, clearly you are not the best of them, are you? This current crop of Tories are not the best for the UK because the simple fact is you guys are the ones who voted to get rid of Northern Ireland from the UK's kind of single market for goods. That was on you guys. You voted for this. You negotiated this, Frost. Be real. Be honest with the people for once. Maybe not now. Maybe in the future he will be. Because let me conclude. Our relationship with the EU cannot endlessly be bound up with Northern Ireland. But the thing is, it will be for a while until you guys finally settle on the protocol. Because the inability to reach a durable protocol settlement means that a huge, indeed, and unbearable amount of weight has been put on Northern Ireland's fragile politics as a result. But that's a weight that you placed on it, Frost. He says it's time to put our own interests first, the integrity of the UK first, the British people first. I hope the government will do so. But the thing is it in the interests of the people for the UK to have the TCA suspended and for us to face other potential sanctions or at least tariffs from not just the EU but also from other countries, like the US, for example? We will be in breach of international law, and given the massive international effort it took to get the Northern Ireland Protocol, the Good Friday Agreement, do you want to do this? We will be a rogue state if we do this. Because I don't know what happens. If we scrap the Northern Ireland Protocol, what happens then? Where does that trade border go? There is no good answer after that, at least in my opinion. But anyways, that concludes our 3-part series on Frost. I think it must have gone for, it's easily over an hour. There is some good bits in here. There are bits where he's honest. Point being is that he's arguing that they agreed to the Northern Ireland Protocol under duress, but we know that's simply not the case. But, the whole point was get Brexit done, renegotiate the protocol afterwards. That's what the whole idea was. Once we leave the EU, we can deal with everything else later, and that's simply not going to happen because the EU aren't going to buckle on this. It's an international agreement. We're acting like we're dealing with some weak country that we can do anything to. The EU are very powerful. I'm trying to say individual EU states are very powerful. They're not going to be bullied by us. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. This concludes our 3-part series. Very long and painful. I think I lost my brain halfway through it. But you know, this man is very annoying to deal with. He's very slimy. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.